But to start off, we're going to hear from Peri Coleman. For many of you, she doesn't need any introduction. She has been the heart and soul, really, of this community response after being one of the first to be the canary in the coal mine, and she continues to be watching this incredibly closely. Please welcome Peri Coleman.
Thank you all for coming. We're here today to hold vigil for the mangroves and the salt marshes of St Kilda. Some of us, close family who lived nearby, were present through the sudden sickening and dying of these old friends. Some of you, friends who live further away, will have been shocked by news of the decline. You'll doubtless have questions. What was the cause? Was it diagnosed promptly? Was everything that could be done, done? As with all sickenings, there was a period of time before any symptoms became apparent. The neighbouring gypsum-lined salt ponds had been lying dry for 7 years. In December 2019 and January 2020, small amounts of hypersaline waste brine from the miners' ponds to the north began to be fed into the ponds. Not much, just a dribble here and there. The brine levels went up and down. By May, that amount ramped up, and suddenly the salt ponds were full of brine. And by July, there were sick trees in the gardens at St Kilda, and the mangroves at the Interpretive Centre were looking ill. By August, the mangroves were dead, and by the end of the month, the local council had asked me to look into it. Imagery from Geoscience's Sentinel-2 near real-time satellites confirmed the extent of the deaths at that time. At least 10 hectares of mangroves and 35 hectares of salt marsh were dead back then. The imagery also confirmed the timeline of the brine introduction into the salt ponds. Government agencies of all stripes started their investigations around the leaking salt ponds, and in mid-October, delegates from mines, environments and the miner undertook a site visit, which confirmed that the impacts were limited to areas adjacent to the ponds that had been filled, and that frank leakage from the salt ponds as well as groundwater mounding were both visibly occurring. At that stage, only 4 salt ponds had been filled with brine. By the end of the month, it was clear that more ponds were being filled with brine, and by the first week of November, there was hypersaline brine pouring into the estuary at the Little Para River, being pumped across Dry Creek and into holding ponds preparatory for making salt. It was at this stage that the Department of Energy and Mining issued an order to stop pumping, as, apparently, the miner had no permission to make salt. Yet no order was made to reduce the head of brine by removing it into the deep storage ponds at Dry Creek. That order did not come until Christmas Eve. By then, much of the 7 kilometres of salt ponds had leaked out, and the remnants were starting to crystallise. Yet no attempt to pump was made until the 2nd week of the new year. You may have seen the picture of the pumping of the pink brine. The pump runs bare minutes at a time. Thus far, it cannot remove enough brine from the first 4 ponds to even wet the next 2 ponds. As fast as the brine is transferred, it simply leaks away. Not a single drop of brine has been removed from the impacted ponds into the designated holding ponds at Dry Creek. Worse, the salt that has already crystallised in 7 kilometres of salt ponds is not a mixture of salts, as the brine was. The salt remaining behind as the ponds leak and evaporate to dryness is pure sodium chloride. These salt deposits will dissolve with each winter rain, and there will be ongoing slugs of pure sodium salt leaving the ponds for years to come. The impact area now greatly exceeds estimations made in August. Hyperspectral imagery flown in the public interest by Airborne Research Australia has allowed difference maps to be developed, which compare the same areas in the same seasons in 2018 and 2021. The numbers for the direct impacts: back swamps in the microestuaries that provide galaxias and Congolese with passage to the sea, 2.4 hectares. cheniers and dunes where the butterflies play, 20.5 hectares. High salt marsh, home to the Christmas spiders and the whiskered terns, 12.8 hectares. Mid to low marsh, where the migratory shorebirds, samphire thornbills and neophema parrots while away the hours, and the mud crabs burrow in delight, 78.7 hectares. Mysterious mangroves, full of clicks and pops and scented with honey through the summer, 78.7 hectares. The total impact zone, including both dead and stressed vegetation, as well as unvegetated, newly waterlogged areas, is 193.1 hectares. There are perhaps another 150 hectares of vegetation that appears to have declining health, but without sufficient evidence to attribute cause. The remaining months of summer and autumn may find some of those areas redefined. The impact zone extends as a narrow band along 6.3 kilometres of coastline, with leakage and groundwater mounding signals visible along 7.4 kilometres of salt pond embankments. As we meet today to think about the mangroves and the salt marshes that we have lost, you have heard Craig Wilkins from Conservation SA mention the 4 urgent actions that need to take place. Those actions will lead, I hope, to recovery, a slow recovery. Forests do not grow overnight. The slow recovery could mean that the children of my grandchildren will one day walk their babies through the mangroves, or listen to the lonely cheep of a sandpiper across the marsh. And today I would also hold in gratitude those members of the public of South Australia who have not been merely sitting on their hands and calling for action from the government. The hyperspectral imagery was flown to both identify the impacted area and to inform restoration efforts going forward. Ongoing drone observations of specific sites have been established to watch for increasing or unexpected impacts, and thank you for that. Citizen scientists have set up vegetation transects in healthy and in sick mangrove and salt marsh areas and have already recorded baseline information in order to track recovery. And local community environment groups have started brainstorming ways to help the area heal and heal more quickly once the impacting brine leakage ceases. So thank you for what you have done so far. Thank you for gathering here today to share memories of the St Kilda mangroves and salt marshes, and for sharing hopes for the future of these special coastal wetlands.
And please keep that applause going for Peri, who's done an extraordinary job of raising this issue and making sure the pressure is kept up. Thank you, Peri.